Now, yes, we are. Good. Okay. So let's pick up the Gemarah in Sanhedrin. We are on page 6b. I will share my screen with you so that you can see the Gemarah. Okay. Can you see the Gemarah there? Yes? Yes? Good. Okay. So we are talking about just a 2 or 3 minute recap for Judy's sake, really, and for everybody who's forgotten where we're up to. The Gemarah Sanhedrin is talking about how judges go about their business of judging in Israel. And the Gemarah starts, we started this back in November, and so we've been going almost a year now, and we've managed to get through about 5 pages in a year, which is pretty good going, I think. The Gemarah starts to talk about how judges judge, how many judges are required for each type of case. And the subject that we are dealing with at the moment is whether or not it is a good thing for judges to encourage compromise between the litigants, or whether it is a bad thing to encourage compromise, and whether they should give a strict interpretation of the halakha. So there is a dispute amongst the rabbis as to what the role of the judges really is. There are those rabbis who say that it's a mitzvah, a positive mitzvah, to encourage litigants to compromise. And there are those who say completely the opposite. Any judge who tries to compromise is considered a blasphemer. He used an incredibly strong language to castigate those people, those judges who want to compromise. So we have an entire spectrum of opinion as to whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Yes, Howard.
I'm sorry if I'm obtuse, but I thought we established weeks ago that it's not that the reprehensible thing is not to encourage the parties to go out and compromise, but where the judge decides he's had enough of this and he'll compromise it without really applying judicial principles.
Well,
I thought we did agree that.
We did say that at one point, but I don't think we actually established that yet as a final position. We're still in, as we say in the Gemarah, we're still in the inyan. Okay, we're still in the that is a position which has been stated, but we're still discussing it. We haven't come to the final maskana, the final point of that. But you're quite right. That's the encouragement. Well, really, what we've said is that prior to a judgment, everybody agrees that it's a good thing for litigants to go away before you get in front of the judge and try and sort your differences out in compromise. Everybody agrees that. The disagreement is when the court is sitting, when the case has come before the judge. Is the judge who encourages compromise at that point doing a good thing or a bad thing? So thank you for that clarification. Right, so what we said at the end of last week's shiur was Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh over here. This is where we got to last time. We spoke about this. Shnayim sheba'u lefanecha ladin, 2 people that come before you, i.e. before a judge for a judgment, ad shelo tishma divrehen, before you've heard their evidence, or mi shetishma divrehen, or you've heard the evidence, but you haven't yet made any decision which way you are leaning in the judgment. Ata rashai lomar lehen, you are permitted to say to them, Tz'u ubitz'u, go out and compromise. However, misha tishma divrehen, once you've heard their evidence, va'ata yodea lahechan hadin noteh, and you've already got a bit of an idea, you've got an inkling as to which way you are leaning. That word noter means to lean, which way you are leaning in terms of judgment. At that point, at that point, you cannot tell them to go out and compromise. Obviously, that makes perfect sense, because if you already know that in your mind you're leaning towards A, then it's not fair to A to say go out and compromise at that point. When you've not heard the evidence, this is what Howard was just saying, but before you've heard the evidence, it's reasonable to say, now get you two, go outside, bang your heads together and come up with a compromise. That's my advice. Once you've heard the evidence and you know which way things are going, then that point where that is an allowable thing to do is past, and you have to go on with the judgment. And we quoted a pasuk from Proverbs, Mishle, Poter mayim reshit madon v'lifnei hitgala hariv natosh. The beginning of an argument, is like when one releases water, and once an argument has broken out, you never know where it's going to lead. So this was really King Solomon, who wrote Mishle, Proverbs, telling us, before you get involved in an argument with anybody, think about where this might lead you. Because just like water, when you pour water out of a cup or out of any kind of vessel, you don't really know where it's going to end up. It's going to go all over the place, and it's going to make a big mess. So when you think about having an argument with somebody, stop, and before you let that water out, before you let that argument out of your mouth, think about whether you are prepared for the consequences of this ending up somewhere where you might not want it to end up. So in a way, what Proverbs is telling us, what King Solomon is saying, is just think twice before you start getting involved in an argument. And I also pointed out last week to you this word over here, riv, argument, which is the origin of the favorite Yiddish word of many people, veribel, an argument. It comes from that same word, riv. Okay, that's where we got to last time. And now we're going to go on to the next part. Now, I'm very pleased to see that we have David Marks with us today, because today we are going to test David Marks's exceptional knowledge of Chumash, and we're going to see just how good it is. I'm sure that he's going to get most of these, but I'm hoping to catch him out with one. I'm also going to see how many of you who daven regularly pay attention to your davening, because we are going to quote some psukim here, which we get to in our daily and weekly prayers, and it will be very interesting to see how many of you can place these prayers that we say on a very regular basis. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to do what the Gemarah does brilliantly. You'll have heard me say many times, it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, that modern day yeshivot, when I say modern day, I mean in the last 150 to 200 years since the yeshiva system has been in as we know it today, has been in existence, concentrates almost exclusively, certainly in the Haredi world at least, almost exclusively on Gemarah. They can learn Gemarah for 9-10 hours a day, and don't, in my humble opinion, spend enough time learning Chumash and Tanakh. And the argument is that if you learn Gemarah properly, then you will learn Chumash and Tanakh as you go along. And this little piece of Gemarah that we're going to learn today is an example of what they would cite as proof for that, because we're going to be quoting various bits of the Tanakh. And the idea, of course, is that when you are learning this in yeshiva with your chavruta, that you actually go to the pasuk that they're quoting and you learn all around the subject. I remember as a kid in school being told to read around subjects. And of course, you know, we didn't have Wikipedia in those days. So you had to actually go to the library and get out books and read around a subject. That was how we were taught in my very excellent school. It wasn't spoon-fed to us. We weren't given summaries. You had to read around a subject. And that's what you're meant to do when you learn Gemarah, which, of course, takes a lot of time and gives me an opportunity for another one of my hobby horses, which is that Daf Hayomi has a very limited value because they are learning 2 pages of Gemarah in an hour. We are doing it fairly superficially in terms of the fact that we're not even going to any of the commentaries, and we've spent 10 months doing 4 pages. So to do a whole daf in an hour and to go back and read around the psukim is just not possible. So to learn Gemarah properly takes a very long time, and to do it properly is a wonderful experience because you can go back to the psukim and look exactly where they've all come from and where the Gemarah takes all its statements from. And that's what we're going to do today a little bit in today's piece of Gemarah. So we're over here. Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish was a famous name in the Gemarah. You'll hear his name very often. And he said the following. Now, this has got a health warning before we start this next little piece of Gemarah. This is a health warning for our lawyers. We have with us, just for Judy, are you a lawyer? No, you're not a lawyer. Okay, so we have with us at least 1, 2, 3, 5 lawyers that I know of in our little shiur here. And the reason we've got so many lawyers is that we're learning Sanhedrin, which is all about law. And the lawyers love it, but they're not going to like this next bit. So lawyers, be ready for this. Howard is going to shake his head in disbelief. I just know it. Julia's going to make a face, and Larry and Sharon have got their camera off, so I can't see them. Leon, of course, never gives away anything with his facial expressions, but they're not going to like this piece of Gemarah. And here goes. Shnayim shaba'u ladin. 2 people, 2 litigants that come before a judge to hear a case. Echad rach ve'echad kasher. Now, Rav Steinsaltz translates this as one is flexible and agreeable, and one is rigid and contentious. But actually, I prefer, on this occasion, the Art Scroll translation, which Leon is going to translate for us. Leon, would you?
Yes, one a gentle person and the other a harsh person.
And now read note 27 for us at the bottom of the page.
Yes, an argumentative person who is troublesome to judges, according to Rashi.
Okay, so Rashi says that this kasher, the word kasher means hard or harsh. Steinsaltz says rigid and contentious. Rashi says argumentative and difficult. Kasher means difficult, obviously. So you've got 2 litigants. One is a nice, easygoing fellow, and the other is a difficult person. We all know difficult people, don't we? And these 2 people come to the judge. One is a nice, easygoing person, and the other is just difficult. He's argumentative, he's contentious, he's rigid, he's all those things that the various different translations have had. Now, listen to what Reish Lakish says. This is a bit you're not going to like, lawyers. Ad shelo tishma divreihem, and before you hear their evidence, or misha tishma divreihem ve'ein ata yodeh la'echin din noteh, or you've heard their evidence, but you've not yet got an idea which way it's going. Same idea as we had before. Listen to this. Ata rashai lomer lahem. You, the judge, are permitted to say, Ein ani nizkak lachem. I am not getting involved in this case. I'm off. I don't fancy it. I'm not judging this case. Why? Shema nitchayav chazak v'nimtza chazak rodfo. Because the judge may be worried that he might find against the difficult person, and then he'll be frightened that the difficult person is going to run after him and cause him sorrows. So the judge says, do you know what? I don't need this aggravation. What do I need this for? I've got a difficult litigant here. If I find against him, I know what's going to happen. We live in a small community. He's going to drive me mad. I'm going to see him in shul next Shabbos, and he's going to go bonkers at me that I found against him. I'm going to be sat in the mikveh there, stark naked, and he's going to come in and he's going to start going on at me that I'm not the right. I just don't need this aggravation. You know what? Let somebody else have the Taurus. I'm off, and I'm not going to judge it. That's okay. However, Misha Tishma Divreihem, once you've heard the evidence, and you know in your own mind which way it's leading, even if it's leading the way that is going against the difficult person, you can't say, I'm out of here, because there is a pasuk that tells us this. The pasuk says, Lo taguru mipnei ish. You shall not be afraid before any man. Okay, now, what do the lawyers think about that? Come on, Howard, what do you think about that?
Well, firstly, we don't know what Rebbe says about it. We don't know if this is the final word. But secondly, I've got to put myself, Rabbi Dr. Louis Jacobs style, into the minds of the people who wrote this in the time and the legal system. And if you've got judges who will fork out for a losing defendant, a losing party from their own pocket, anything's possible.
That was only David HaMelech.
Oh, that's true. That was only David HaMelech. That's true. Okay, so the answer is it's a different legal system.
Okay, so it's not something that you would recognise as being acceptable in our legal system.
This is what there are many things that have trickled down impressively to today's practice. This is not one of them.
Okay.
Larry,
what
yes.
have you got to say?
I would say, having done a lot of trial work, that at least at the beginning, we have a concept in the US, which I'm sure is true in the UK and other places, of a judge recusing himself or herself. And recusal is done because a judge doesn't think he or she may be able to judge fairly. If the judge is fearful of that person, then he or she is more likely than not to rule for them, and therefore the judge should remove himself from the case in order to be sure that justice is done to both sides.
Okay, so you would recognize, Larry, at least the principle of this as being something which is in existence even today.
Sure. I mean, I once had a guy who came to me who was clearly an anti-Semite, but he was told that Jewish lawyers are the people to get you off best. And I told him, look, I can't represent you for a variety of reasons, including the fact that I may not be able to represent you well because I abhor you.
Right, okay, that's interesting. Okay, is there a difference? Let me just ask you this, Larry. Is there a difference between the lawyer who's representing the client, who can say, as you've said, I think you're an absolutely horrible human being and I don't think I can do my best for you. Is there a difference between that situation and the judge who is sitting in judgment and the two litigants here? One is somebody who is let's say a known gangster, and the other guy is an ordinary fellow. Is there a difference between that? Do you think that in that situation in the modern world, the judge would say, actually, I'm frightened of this guy, and I'm not going to judge it? Is that something that might happen?
Well, I certainly would agree that the judge, and particularly since there are many more lawyers than there are judges, the judge would have to be, pardon the expression, but more judicious in his decision to withdraw from the case. But I still think that if a judge feels that he or she cannot be impartial, they should not take the case.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Particularly without a jury.
Well,
yeah, okay, that's really interesting. Julia and Leon, have you got anything to add?
Only that the circumstances are very different. We're talking about a different era. There's very little chance of a judge being harassed by a harsh litigant at the present time. But if you're living in a small community and at the same community as the litigants in the case, then you do have to be careful. And at that time, it was probably a good thing to allow the judge to withdraw from the case.
Very interesting. Okay, really interesting.
I have one comment, which is just to say I'm not a litigation lawyer, and I don't know very much about litigation, but I'm surprised that both this statement and the one before, it allows you to not just make your decision or encourage mediation before you've heard statements, but to do so after and before you know where the judgment is leaning. And I wouldn't know whether that's very common. I would have thought once you've heard the statements, at that point, you really are more than likely to know where the judgment is leaning. What are you waiting for?
I also thought the same thing, Julia. I thought exactly the same thing. If the Gemarah had stopped at the first bit, then it makes perfect sense. And I suppose the answer to that question is that it's possible, I think, that you hear opening statements and the two opening statements don't really lead you anywhere. But you're right. The more you hear, the more you're going to have an idea where it's going, I would imagine. I've never been a judge, but I imagine, and certainly the point that you make is a good, strong point, and it's something that I thought of as well. Let's go on and see where this pasuk is all about. Now, we can't ask David Marks where this one is from because he can see it on my screen. Not that he would need to see it on my screen because he would know that it was in Sefer Devarim, in Parshat Devarim. Let's have a look where let's go and do what I was saying we ought to be doing when we learn Gemarah and go back and look at this pasuk, which the Gemarah brings as a proof for what it's just said. He's translated it here as, you shall not be afraid of any man. Let's look at the context. Let's look at the context of this. Now, I have on my screen here, chapter 1 of Devarim. Can you see that? Can you see my screen with Devarim now? Yeah, okay. And the pasuk is, what pasuk was it? 17, I think. Was it 17? Yes, there it is. Now, yes, thank you. So let's have a look and see what we're talking about here. This is Moshe Rabbeinu. Remember, this is chapter 1 of Devarim. This is the beginning of Moshe's last speech to the children of Israel. And it begins with the following words. These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel on this side of the Jordan. And then he starts to give them a history lesson. He gives them a history lesson of what happened. He gets to the point over here. Verse 10 onwards, Leon, if you wouldn't mind. Verse 10 onwards.
Hashem, your God, has multiplied you, and behold, you are like the stars of heaven in abundance. May Hashem, the God of your forefathers, add to you 1,000 times yourselves and bless you as he has spoken of you. How can I alone carry your contentiousness, your burdens, and your quarrels? Provide for yourselves distinguished men who are wise, understanding, and well known to your tribes, and I shall appoint them as your heads.
Just stop there for a sec, Leon. Stop there for a sec. So what Moshe has said here is, you've become a very big nation, and please God, you'll become even greater. And I can't do it all on my own now. So what he's saying now, this is an instruction to appoint judges. This is an instruction for them to choose the appropriate people to be the judges. Prepare for yourselves wise and understanding men, and make them heads over you. And so carry on, Leon, verse 14.
You answered me and said, the thing that you have proposed to do is good. So I took the heads of your tribes, distinguished men, who were wise and well known, and I appointed them as heads over you. Leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s and leaders of 10s, and officers for your tribes.
Stop there for a sec. Stop there for a sec. So here we've got a very clear structure. This is the structure of the court system, which still exists today. You have the lower courts, you have the higher courts, you have the higher court still, the Supreme Court, and of course, at the top of that pyramid at that time was Moshe Rabbeinu himself, who had a direct line, as it were, to Hashem. So here in verse 15, we have the concept of a pyramid, a hierarchy of courts. Verse 16.
I instructed your judges at that time, saying, listen among your brethren and judge righteously between a man and his brother or his litigant. You shall not show favoritism in judgment. Small and great alike shall you hear. You shall not tremble before any man, for the judgment is God's. Any matter that is too difficult for you, you shall bring to me, and I shall hear it.
Okay, so there's our pasuk. There's our comment. Lo taguru mipnei ish. Do not fear any man. So the context is, and a very appropriate context, Reish Lakish has quoted a pasuk which is talking exactly about our subject, which is how judges should conduct themselves in judgment. This is Moshe Rabbeinu giving them instructions and encouragement not to be frightened of anybody. You shall hear the small just as the great. That has two different meanings. Let's have a look at the kekaton, kegadol tishmu'un. It can mean either you shall hear small cases, i.e. cases that are worth a small amount of money, just in as much detail and with as much care as with a big case. Or it can mean you should listen to the small man. I don't mean the sort of, short 5'1" man. I mean the small man in reputation, in the same way as you should listen to a large man, a man with a big reputation. In other words, don't be put off by a person's position. And finally, do not fear any person. Why? Ki hamishpat le'Elohim hu. Now that's a part of the pasuk we quoted a few weeks ago. You'll remember. Ultimately, says Moshe Rabbeinu, ultimately the judgment belongs to God. Yes, Larry or Sharon, whoever you are.
This is Sharon. It's open. I have the Steinsaltz rendering of these verses, and it's interesting because, of course, he interlineates for the variety of possible translations. and offers them as a gloss on the topic. He says, "You shall not give preference to either side in judgment. Small and great alike you shall hear equally, to safeguard justice and honesty. You shall not fear speaking your mind or remaining silent due to any man, as judgment is God's. No personal considerations may enter the judge's decision-making, as his task is to relay God's judgment to the litigants. Consequently, any perversion of justice is a sin against God and a betrayal of God's agency." And then he goes back to the text, "And the matter that is too difficult for you, you shall bring near to me, and I will hear it and attempt to find a solution." So that is all of just verse 17 as translated by Steinsaltz. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So let's go back for a second to our Gemarah. Where is it? There we go. So Reish Lakish says to the judge, don't fear anybody. You shouldn't be afraid. So I've got a question against Reish Lakish, which is not raised here. If this pasuk is to be taken as we have said it, why should it be allowed for the judge to step aside before he's heard the judgment? He's being instructed by Moshe not to be afraid of any man. And in fact, we can see that he is, inverted commas, allowed to be afraid of this litigant before he's heard the evidence. He's allowed. He says, "Atara shaylo ma'alehem." You're permitted to say, "Ani nizkak lechem." I'm not going to judge your case. You would expect Reish Lakish to say that even before he's heard the evidence, a judge should not say that, because he is enjoined by Moshe Rabbeinu in our pasuk not to be afraid of any man. I haven't found an answer as to why Reish Lakish thinks that it's acceptable for a judge to stand aside at that point, despite the fact that he then quotes a pasuk which I think questions his whole position. He only applies this fear once he's heard the judgment, and he knows that it's possibly going against the harsh guy. So I've got that question against Reish Lakish. Has anybody got any defense for Reish Lakish? Yes, Howard.
No, on the contrary, and why not read the footnote, which says, "It appears as in the case of a regular and permanent communal judge, he may not decline to judge the dispute under any circumstance."
Absolutely. So that's the Rambam, and that is, and also the Shulchan Aruch. So in the end of the day, my question against Reish Lakish seems to be upheld in halacha itself. So I was not clever enough to hide that halacha from you when I asked you the question. I should have had the page like that, so you couldn't see that. But yes, the idea is, of course, that this is just Reish Lakish's opinion. Halacha comes along at the end of the day and says, no, our pasuk, lo taguru mipnei ish, must apply across the board. And that, in fact, had Howard not spotted that, I would have then gone up the page like that and showed you the footnote and the halacha. Who's waving at me? Marcel, you want to say something?
Yes, Jonathan. I was just wondering why, in a case where the judge was actually personally frightened of the people, why he couldn't ask to be part of two other judges to join him and be 3 judges to judge it, so that he's not singled out as being.
Okay. Okay, that's a fair question. But the answer, of course, is, go on, Leon, tell us the answer.
Well, it may not have been Reish Lakish. There are different versions. and they seem to be one of two sons of Reish Lakish that could be the author of this. He was a highwayman, if I'm not mistaken, and he wouldn't be, I shouldn't think, would be frightened of a harsh litigant. So it might have some bearing on his opinion as to whether a judge should be allowed to withdraw.
That's interesting. Yes, Reish Lakish has an interesting history. Reish Lakish was a bandit. He was a highway robber who became a Baal Teshuvah and became the famous Reish Lakish. So yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that. He's unlikely to have been frightened of a litigant. That's a very good point. Okay, has anybody got an answer to Marcel's question? Is why don't we make this into a three-man panel, and then the harsh judge the harsh litigant won't know which judge to go after? Anyone got a suggestion? Larry, have you got your hand up to answer that?
Well, I was actually going to make a different comment, but who knows if there are three judges available in this particular situation? I guess is the first question I would have.
Okay.
But I also just wanted to comment that given human frailty, despite the admonition that you must not be afraid of any litigant, if the judge knows in their heart that they cannot render fair judgment, then they should withdraw from the case.
I think that is exactly the point, Larry. And thank you for raising that. I think that and maybe Leon, maybe it is because Reish Lakish was a highway robber that he knows that people can be, if you like, made fearful, can be frightened of other people. And what he's saying, I think, what Larry is saying, and I agree with that, is that it's all very well Moshe Rabbeinu saying "Lo taguru mipnei ish," but actually, that's not something you can say. You can say to your kids, "Don't be frightened of the bogeyman." But if they are frightened of the bogeyman, they're frightened of the bogeyman, and that's it. It's very hard to instruct people regarding emotions. I just want to answer Marcel's question, and I'm going to take you back. Julia's going to like this. I'm going to take you back 10 months to answer Marcel's question. And I'm going to take you to November of last year. And I'm going to take you back to the very first words of our Gemarah, our first Mishnah. Dinei mamonot bishlosha. How many times have we said that over the last 10 months? Monetary cases are judged by three judges. This is exactly what we're talking about. It's a monetary case. So by definition, there are three judges. There are already three judges, Marcel. It's not a single guy. This is one of the three that's frightened, or maybe all three of them are frightened. But our case here is a monetary case of two litigants, and the Mishnah's already taught us, and we have established, I think, fairly clearly that according to most opinions, Dinei Mamonot Bishlosha, those three first words of our Mishnah, this is a case already of three judges. Okay? Right. Can we go on? No, we've got some hands up. Howard.
I just think, with respect, Larry should have identified, first of all, whether the judge is a Democrat judge or a Republican judge.
Oh, that's political. I'm muting you. We're not allowed any politics in this year. Right, let's go on. So now we come to the test for David Marks. David, where else? There's only, that I know of, two other places in the whole of Tanakh where we come across this verb, lo taguru, do not be afraid of any man. Normally, we would not use that word for fear. We would use lo tiru, do not be afraid. Vayiru ha'am, and the people were afraid. So tell us, if you can, David, where we come across the this word this verb lo taguru, apart from this pasuk? Any offers?
Yeah, I know. Lo taguru acharei babachem acharei nechem. In Mishpatim, in
David?
Similar. Lo tiskaru.
Where's that? How about over here, David? Give you a clue. It's in Devarim.
Yeah. Am I right with the word lo tiskaru?
Well, not that I know of. No, it's not
No. Okay.
That's not one that I had.
Okay. So if it's in Devarim, I would have lamed it in the last few weeks. No, I'm not going to waste your time.
Okay, here it is. It's in chapter 9, verse 19. Ki yogarti mipnei ha'af v'ha'chema.
Ki yagoti mipnei ha'af v'ha'chema shekatzav Hashem. Yeah.
There we go. That's right. This is Moshe Rabbeinu telling us how he felt when he was up with Hashem and he saw that the golden calf had been made. Here it is in verse 19 of chapter 9. If you're with us, Leon, you could read that out for us. You're on mute, Leon. You're on mute. You're on mute. Leon, unmute. Unmute, Leon.
Right.
There we go.
Put the text up again. Thank you. For I was frightened of the wrath and the fury, that the Lord was angry with you to destroy you. And the Lord hearkened to me also at that time.
Okay, so that was the one that I thought I might catch him out with, and there we are. It's very unusual that we can catch David out, but there we are. We've done it. We've done it. There we go. Hashem, that's the same word. Now, I'll tell you where the other one is. The other one is in Tehillim, and it's in chapter 33. And I want you all to tell me, all you people who daven regularly, where in the service you say this pasuk, and you say this pasuk, which has the word in it. Let me see if I can find it. Which verse is it? Got it all ready before, can't find it now. Here we go. Yiru me'Hashem kol haaretz mimenu, yaguru, there's the verse, yaguru kol yoshvei tevel. Let all the earth fear Hashem. There's the word yiru, the normal word for fear. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. Yaguru. Yiru me'Hashem kol haaretz mimenu, yaguru kol yoshvei tevel. That is said by all of us once a week. When do we say that in davening? Any offers?
Psukei Zimra in Shabbos.
Correct. It's in the Psukei Zimra of Shabbat. You'll recognize it when I show you the beginning of the verse. Rananu tzadikim ba'Hashem la'yesharim navat tehillah. It comes immediately after all the Hodu Lashem Kitovs that we have to stand up for on Shabbos morning. Immediately after that, we say this chapter of Tehillim. Rananu tzadikim b'Hashem la'yesharim navat tehillah. You'll all recognize it now. And in there is that verse, Yirag me Hashem koretz memenu yaguru kol yoshvei tevel. As far as I am aware, those are the only 3 places in the whole of Tanakh where this verb yaguru is mentioned. Now, why am I telling you all that? No reason whatsoever, except that it shows you how we ought to be learning Gemarah. We ought to be taking every single word and using it to expand our knowledge and to go and have a look at the various sources. So that is Reish Lakish's little effort. Let's go back to the Gemarah and let's go on. Now, as you will know, every time there is an opinion from one of our rabbis about what a pasuk means, there is at least one other opinion about the same pasuk, which means something different, or we can learn something different from it. And that's what the Gemarah is all about, backwards and forwards. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who we've heard from before, brings a different idea from that pasuk, lo yaguru mipnei ish, lo taguru mipnei ish, do not be afraid of any man. And he says this, very interesting. He says, minayin letalmid sheyoshev lifnei rabo. How do we know that if there is a student sitting in front of his teacher, v'ra'a zechut le'ani, and he sees in the case, he's listening to the case, he's sitting in the gallery there of the court, and he hears that there is a point of merit for this poor person who looks like he's going to lose the case. Or v'chova le'ashir, or he sees that there is a point which may cause the rich person to lose the case. Minayin, how do we know? Where do we know the halacha shelo yishtok, that he is not allowed to remain silent? In other words, he has to speak up and say, hang on a minute, what about such and such a point? Now, why shouldn't he? Why do we need a proof that he is allowed to, or he has to speak up? Any ideas? Why is the Gemarah telling us this? Because you've forgotten what we learned a few weeks ago. We learned a few weeks ago that a person is not allowed to give judgment in a case, or even pass according to some opinions, even give a shiur in the presence of his Rebbe. Remember, we talked about this, Julia's remembering now, we talked about this a few weeks ago, that somebody is not allowed to give a judgment in the same town as his Rebbe. So here, this fellow is sitting in the audience of the court case. He's not only in the same town, he's in the same court case. So you might think that this fellow's not allowed to speak up and not allowed to say, hang on, Rebbe, have you considered such and such a point? So what the Gemarah tells us, what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is telling us, is that this is a special case. That here, if you see that a poor person is losing, and you have information or you have a point that might help his case, or the other way around, that a rich person is winning and you have some information that might cause him not to win, then you have to speak up. Shenema, as it says, lo taguru mipnei ish, do not be afraid of any person. And Steinsaltz helps us out by saying what this means. He should fear neither his teacher nor the wealthy litigant. I had the question, before I read the Steinsaltz, I had the question, why should he only remain silent? Why should he only not remain silent if the information that he has favors the poor person and goes against the rich person? Surely, if he's got some information that he needs to, that he thinks can alter the course of the case, makes no difference which way the case is going, you should speak up. But Steinsaltz answers my question by saying, no, you might think that he would be frightened to speak up in our case because he'd be frightened, like our judge was frightened that the wealthy person or the harsh person would come after him. He might be frightened, this Talmud might be frightened that he would also cop for it from this chap. So he might be frightened. He wouldn't be frightened of the poor person or the not harsh, the easygoing person. And he lumps this together with, this is a special case that goes against the idea that we spoke of a few weeks ago, that a Talmid cannot give a judgment in front of his Rebbe. In fact, you could argue this isn't a judgment. He's just saying to his Rebbe, and the way you would say it is, Rebbe, I'm sure that you have thought of this, but I just thought I would mention that it occurred to me that X, Y, and Z. And then the Rebbe can say, well, of course I thought of that, but I've dismissed it because of A, B, C. Or, yes, I'm just coming to that. Thank you very much for reminding me. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is using our pasuk of don't be afraid of anyone to say, don't be afraid of putting your oar in against your, not against, but to help out, inverted commas, your Rebbe. And don't be frightened of the wealthy, powerful, harsh litigant who might think that you've spoiled his whole situation by putting your oar in. Sharon, you want to ask a question or say something?
No, just a thought, and this has nothing to do with legalism. It has to do with the concept, we always think of Jews as feeling somehow compelled as a group and as individuals to say something when they see injustice. And it's interesting that the necessity of self-knowledge comes before feeling compelled. You have to know yourself well enough to know how you're reacting to this situation before you say something. But then once you do, you're compelled to say it. And I think that that's a really fascinating psychological portrait of the moral training of Jews through the last many thousands of years.
Okay, thank you for that comment. I'd like to back that up by quoting an article that I read. I think, I can't remember where I read it now. It might have been in the Mizrahi magazine that came out just before Rosh Hashanah, or it might have been somewhere else, but it was definitely a quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And Rabbi Sachs says exactly that point that Sharon has made, that over the centuries, Jews have always been at the forefront of the fight against injustice. And perhaps the reason for that is that we have been so many times in history the subject of injustice ourselves. And he puts it beautifully, as he always does. And he said something like this: that is why you will find that there is a preponderance of doctors fighting disease, Jewish doctors fighting disease, Jewish lawyers fighting injustice, Jewish teachers fighting ignorance. What else did he quote? All sorts of things that he said that there was a preponderance of Jews fighting the idea that there is injustice or inequality in the world. And I think that's very true. I have to say that it is a particularly strong character trait of my own children, and it's one that I am perhaps the most proud of my children, is that they have a burning sense of justice. It got them into trouble many, many times in school when they stuck up for the kid that was getting bullied, usually by the teacher rather than by the pupils, and they would stand up for this kid. And it did. It got them in all sorts of bother over the years. But nevertheless, I was proud, and I remain proud of that fact, that they do have a burning sense of justice. And I think that is a very Jewish trait. And Sharon, thank you for bringing that point up. And what's interesting is that we are seeing a very open approach to psychology here by both Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, by saying what Sharon has just said is, yes, you have to do the right thing, but you know what? You have to be able to take it too. You have to be able to take these consequences. And perhaps it's not, I don't know, I've only just thought of this, perhaps it's rubbish, but perhaps this is the reason why this little bit of Gemarah that we've just been doing comes immediately after that verse from Proverbs that said, once you let some water out, you've got to know where it's going to lead to. Before you open your mouth and say something, be ready for the consequences. And if you are strong enough, and this is what the Torah is encouraging us to be strong, because it says, do not fear any man. If you can handle it, then that is the way to do it. Lo taguru mipnei ish. And I think that what we see here is quite a sophisticated psychological point, as well as the moral point that Rabbi Sachs makes so eloquently, that we as Jews have an obligation to fight inequality and injustice wherever we see it. So I'd like to just finish this little section before we end, because it's not a good place to stop in the middle of this little section. So let me just finish this little section here, and then we'll wrap up. Rabbi Chanin Omer, Rabbi Chanin says something else. He says, Lo tachnis devarecha mipnei ish. Do not suppress your statement before any man. V'hu eidim yodim et mihein meidin. He says, witnesses should know about whom they are testifying. V'lifnei mihein meidin, and before whom they are testifying. Umi atid lipara mehen, and who ultimately in the future will exact payment from them. And it quotes a verse, Va'amdu shnei ha'anashim asher lahem hariv lifnei Hashem. And the men about whom the controversy is, in other words, you would think that this is talking about the litigants. The litigants should know who they're having a discussion with, a dispute with, and that is Hashem. But actually, this verse is not talking about litigants. This verse is talking about something else completely. It's from Dvarim 19. Where's David gone? David, can you tell us what this verse is referring to? Va'amdu shnei ha'anashim asher lahem hariv lifnei Hashem. You're on mute, David. David, unmute.
It's somewhere in Parashas Shoftim.
It is indeed. And it's talking about false witnesses. So it's talking, I think I've got this up as well. Just give me a sec and I'll get it up. It's 1917. Here we go. Here, it's talking up here. I don't know, can you see the screen, Leon?
Yes. No, I've got it on in front of me anyway.
You've got it on front of you. Go from verse 15, please. No, 16.
If a false witness stands against a man to speak up spuriously against him, then the two men and those who have the grievance shall stand before Hashem, before the Kohanim and the judges who will be in those days. The judges shall inquire thoroughly, and behold, the testimony was false testimony. He spoke up falsely against his fellow. You shall do to him as he conspired to do to his fellow, and you shall destroy the evil from your midst. So that's Eidim Zomamin, isn't it?
Eidim Zomamin, exactly. Eidim Zomamin. This is the parsha of false witnesses. The Torah tells us that if you have false witnesses that are shown to be false, whatever the punishment that they were trying to pin on the accused falsely, they cut for that punishment themselves. That's how the Torah deals with them. So this verse here says, these false witnesses should know that they are standing lifnei Hashem. And he quotes that pasuk and applies it to our situation, to any witnesses. So any person who sees something, if you've got evidence and you know something, or you've got an opinion, which is what we were talking about here, that may alter the case, then you have an obligation to speak up. And he says, do not suppress your statement before any man, meaning before the judge, even if he's your teacher, because you are standing before Hashem. All judgments ultimately are made before Hashem. And what he's saying is, you should know, the Eidim, the witnesses should know who they're giving testimony in front of. That's Hashem. They should also know who's going to exact punishment from them in the future, and that's Hashem. So if you go to your grave with information that could have altered the course of a particular case, and you didn't speak up, what Rabbi Chanin is saying is that you have sinned against Hashem, and ultimately it will be Hashem that exacts punishment from you in there. In other words, it's an encouragement that we must speak up. And again, this is the same idea. You cannot remain silent in the face of injustice. It's a very Jewish trait. As Sharon said, this is what Jews have done throughout the ages. They have campaigned against injustice. In any age that you can think of over the millennia, you will find prominent amongst the campaigners for justice, you will find Jews. And I would suggest to you, I have no evidence for this, but I just feel it's in my water, it's true. I would suggest to you that the Jews will be there at the forefront, out of proportion to the numbers in the population. They will be at the forefront of the fight against injustice. And this little piece of Gemarah that we've done today gives us a very little insight into the Jewish psyche, and I think it's an appropriate place to stop. It's an appropriate thing to have done before Yom Kippur, Yom Hadin. We are standing before the time where we're going to be judged. If we are appropriately campaigning for the underdog and for injustice, and to make sure that the poor person gets a fair hearing, then we can hopefully expect the same kind of approach from HaKadosh Baruch Hu when he is judging us in the poverty of our actions when it comes to Yom Kippur next week. So any final comments before we wrap this up? Michael Kraus.
Right, you're talking about to compromise or not to compromise. What about a situation, say for example, accountant or a lawyer and a client, where the client says, I only owe you £1,000 for the work you've done, and the lawyer or the accountant says, you owe me 10 grand for the work you've done, and the judge has to look through and actually look at the time recording and what he was doing and everything else, and actually compromise because he doesn't think the 1,000 is right or the 10,000 is right. That doesn't seem to be looked at in this particular situation, or the particular...
I don't see that as a compromise, Michael. I see that as a judgment. The judge is making a judgment based on the evidence. He says, okay, accountant or lawyer, what's your hourly rate? Your hourly rate is X. That was either agreed or not agreed. Let's say it was agreed. You tell me how many hours you've done, and I will tell you as a matter of judgment whether I think that's reasonable or not. It may appear to be a compromise, but I don't think that's what this is talking about. I think the case that you have described is a case of judgment. The compromise would be, he says, look, you say £1,000, he says 10 grand, get out of here, go and spend a couple of hours together and see if you can come up with something which between you, you're satisfied with. If not, then I will give you a judgment.
Yeah, well, I'm not trying to say that. I'm saying basically that the client says, well, the amount of hours you should have done was X. You took a much more hours than you should have done, and therefore you were working inefficiently, and therefore I shouldn't have to pay for the whole lot. Yes, I'd pay for £1,000 worth, but not 10,000, rather than what you're saying.
but is it not the same situation that if you go to a judge, the judge is going to apply his judgment to that case? The judge is not saying, well, I just don't know, so I'm going to compromise. He's going to look at the evidence. He's going to say, well, this is the amount of work that needed to be done. I think that you should have been able to do that in 5 hours. You've charged for 10 hours. So I'm only going to award you the costs for 5 hours, because in my judgment, not in my compromise, but in my judgment, that is how long I think it should have taken you.
Yeah, but remember that the client says it should have cost 1,000, and you say 10,000. The judge now is saying £5,000. So
Yeah.
isn't he compromising between? He's not saying I vote in favour of the plaintiff or the defendant. I'm going to go somewhere in the middle, which strikes me still as being a compromise.
Well, it may. Well, I think that's true. It looks like a compromise, but I think if the judge says, well, actually, I think this should have been 4.73 hours.
Right.
So I'm going to charge you 4,730. I chose a bad example because it was bang in the middle, so it looked like he was just picking a figure out of thin air. But if he says, I think this should have taken you 4.73 hours because that's how long I think this should have taken the average Joe lawyer, and the average Joe lawyer charges £1,000 an hour, so you're going to get 4,730. That is my judgment. It's not a compromise. I'm not saying I don't know which way to judge, and so I'm going to go somewhere down the middle. That is my considered judgment. If he says, I have no idea how long this should take, I don't have any expert evidence here to tell me, then I have no choice but to compromise, and I'm going to go bang down the middle, then that's a different case. What I would expect a judge to do was to hear the evidence from the two sides, and then to bring an expert witness whose duty it is to help the court and not to help either client, and to tell him, okay, you've heard the evidence, Mr. Expert Witness who doesn't have any connection with either side, you tell me in your expert evidence how long this should have taken, and then that becomes a judgment, not a compromise.
Okay.
Ollie, you were right the first time. In England, cost judges spend their lives assessing what the costs ought to be. You were absolutely right in the first case. And very rarely does expert evidence be presented in an assessment hearing. So
Okay,
right.
thank you for that.
It's not
Okay.
a compromise, it's a judgment, as you said. But I would like to add that the number of Jews who fought against apartheid and against desegregation was totally disproportionate to their numbers in South Africa and America. What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great show, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments before we close?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Johnny.
I will be in touch with the information that we